Hey everybody, Crystal Lightning Eater here. What I'm going to do today is, instead of the conventional half-hour power discussion, I'm actually going to do a Pokemon TCG talk, where I'm going to talk about some aspect of the Pokemon trading card game and give you my thoughts, opinions, advice on a certain subject or the whole game as a whole. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to do an introduction for beginner players if they want to join into the competitive scene and what decks are good. This video probably won't run a half hour, but I'll make sure to have another half-hour power discussion up for next Thursday. Now, first thing you should know if you're a beginning player is that the competitive scene is expensive. Many cards go for well over 20 bucks just for a single copy. So if you're running just a single part-time job even, I wouldn't recommend it. You need to have some extra cash that you can flush out for these cards. And the problem is with the competitive scene is that with every set, there's a chance that your deck will become irrelevant. Pokemon may release a counter, like there was a Druddigon card, which made Blastoise a really overhyped deck that I followed on the bandwagon of. That was pretty decent, instantly dead in the water. No water pun jokes, but it became an irrelevant deck as Druddigon could one-hit KO Black Kyurem, the ace card of that deck, and it just all fell apart. Now, for the competitive scene, if you're going to try and get into it, I recommend by starting off by making sure you have a sizable collection before you go to a league and join. By a sizable collection, I mean that you have at least 15 energies of every type, that you have a good amount of EXs, rares, uncommons, and commons, and that you have, like, experience on, like you should do some research on what cards are good and which cards are not. That'll just some 10 minutes of research and you'll find out what kind of decks are good, what kind of decks are not so good. Mainly, you'll find decks that are great, and you'll have to go off them. But the thing is with those is that you don't exactly have to follow them. I mean, many lists on the internet are just skeleton lists that you can change around. So therefore, everyone can play something different, even if they're playing the same thing. So what you want to do, if you're looking to get into the competitive scene, is you're going to go to, like, a local card shop, just ask them about a Pokemon League to join. They'll give you an identification card, you're just going to pop that into Pokemon.com. They have an account, and you just sign up, and they have dates for, like, regional states and stuff. So, besides just, like, joining the league and going to the card shop every once in a while to play cards, there's a lot of great online communities that can help you out. I know, especially for me, I follow 6 Prizes. Shout out to those guys over there. And the Top Cut, Puka does a great job with his decks that can really help get beginners into the game. And you should definitely follow one of them and see, like, what they have to say about beginners, because, I mean, when I'm making this video, I'm at 17 subscribers. Not a lot of people are going to hear this, and if I ever do get good, people can come back and watch this video and be like, hey, he only had 17 subscribers. My advice isn't that meaningful compared to what they can give you. So I recommend you check out the Top Cuts YouTube, the 6 Prizes, and their forums. Even the Pokemon.com forums, which, despite them being really generic, can be sometimes very helpful. Now I'm gonna go over the what I think are the strongest decks in the season, which will start from a rotation September 2014 on, which will be the set Pokemon Boundaries Crossed on. Now this means that any sets older than Black and White Boundaries Crossed, you can't play unless the cards were reprinted in a later set within that bracket of space. You can check out what cards are legal and what not, and on Pokemon.com they have a list. But I'm going to go down a list here that I've made and tell you what decks I think are the strongest and that people will most likely see in leagues and tournaments. Now, for start, we have Seismitoad. Now, I think Seismitoad is actually possibly going to be the strongest deck in the format. For a single DCE, or double colorless energy, he can prevent you from playing items during your next turn. Now, despite his horrendous output of damage at 30, that ability to block items for an entire turn, items usually consist about possibly even up to a fourth of a deck. Therefore, like item-based draw decks like Pyroar and I think Heracross, like some variants of Heracross are item-based draw. Like a lot of bicycle, a lot of roller skates, shuts them down immediately. A lot of evolution decks that require rare candy are heavily impacted. So I feel like by Pokemon releasing this Seismitoad card, they're trying to get people to play more supporters. And that makes sense, as they've been releasing some really wacky supporters like Team Flare Gun and the upcoming AZ and Phantom Forces. Which I think is kind of interesting. But Seismitoad combined with Garbodor to shut down abilities is going to definitely be the strongest deck. And if you're going to regionals, I recommend that your deck be well prepared for Seismitoad. Next on the list, I'm just going down a list of stuff I've not in any specific tier order or like what decks will be most prevalent. I think this list is pretty much random in terms of like what came to me. Okay, so next on the list I have Heracross variants. They usually include Mega Heracross and Virizion. They're not especially expensive depending on how many Virizion you run. So I mean, you could expect to see a few of them more than normal. But Heracross and Mega Heracross aren't necessarily powerful because Heracross's attacks are pretty lackluster and Mega Heracross's attack subtracts damage for every damage counter on him. So that's not especially great, even though it does hit 180 base. So I mean, maybe you'll come across a few Mega Heracross decks, but it's not going to be nearly as popular as Seismitoad. Next down the list, we have Thundurus Deoxys Kyurem, also known as TDK. This deck is extremely popular, has been ever since Kyurem's release. I believe back in Plasma Storm he was released. It might have been Plasma Freeze. No, I'm pretty sure it's Plasma Storm. Excuse me if I'm wrong. But the problem is TDK is going to lose a few things thanks to the rotation. It's going to lose Prism Energy, which is a big make or break for it. Now, I mean, you can still play Rainbow Energy, which does the 10 damage, but when you're losing Prism Energy, that's pretty impactful. That 10 damage can come and bite you in the butt sometimes. Besides that, I don't think they're losing too much, because most of the Plasma sets are still in formation. I think all the Plasma sets are still in formation, mind that. And Laser, still in the format. Thundurus, Kyurem, and Deoxys are all staying in the format. So they're not too impacted, but it's going to be interesting to see like how they cope with Seismitoad and other big decks that are going to be prevalent in this new format. Next down the list, we do have Pyroar variants. I personally play Pyroar, and if you're going to Philadelphia Regionals, I should be there. I might not play Pyroar there, though, so don't count on that. But, Pyroar decks are pretty big. They weren't played as much as they were at Worlds compared to how the amount of Pyroar decks we saw at Nationals. But what Pyroar does, if you don't know, is it blocks all damage from basic Pokemon. So therefore, every EX Pokemon deals no damage to it. Now, the problem is with Pyroar is that it doesn't block effects. So like things like Seismitoad can still prevent you from playing items. But Seismitoad will usually win out over Pyroar because Garbodor shuts down its ability, Pyroar doesn't have defense against basics, Pyroar is also weak to water, Seismitoad's water type, hits for weakness, it can 2-hit KO it most times. Besides that, Pyroar is pretty self-explanatory. You run a 4-4 Pyro line, so you run 4 Litleo, 4 Pyroar, and then usually a Charizard and maybe 1 to 2 Mewtwo. It is item-based draw, unfortunately, so that is quite impacted by Seismitoad matchups. I haven't actually seen a Pyro versus Seismitoad match yet, but I'm pretty sure it would be a little bit toward the Seismitoad line in terms of favorability, but I mean, Pyro could bring out the Garbodor lots of times thanks to Lysandre and other switching cards like Catcher. So I'd like to see how that is balanced. I'll probably keep an eye out for it on Play TCG and PTCGO. Next down the list we have Donphan. Now Donphan's an interesting deck that was created out of the loss of Excelgor, who we lost to the rotation. What Excelgor did is it paralyzed and poisoned your opponent, for a DCE and then threw it back out off the field. And then you would sub in Trevenant or something to prevent your opponent from playing items with that ability. Now that that is gone, we have Donphan. Donphan would normally not be playable if not for the release of Furious Fists. Furious Fists introduced a whole bunch of buffing cards for fighting types, allowing Donphan to, like, I believe it's 1 energy for 40 normally, and then if you give him a strong energy and a muscle band, he's all of a sudden hitting for huge amounts of damage, especially on things with fighting weakness, and just returning him to the bench is pretty impactful. Besides that, for Donphan decks, Fampi, what evolves into Donphan, actually has 80 HP for a basic, which is huge, which means rarely will it get one hit KO'd by something not an EX or without a huge amount of energy on it. Besides that, Donphan can also switch into Trevenant, which prevents item play, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's like what Gothitelle was until they released Trevenant, who was only a stage 1 instead of a stage 2. So I'm not sure how Donphan's going to go against top-tier decks, but I've seen it play a few times, and it can get brutal if you don't take down the Fampis fast enough. Next on the list, I have the fighting-type variant decks, including Lucario EX and Landorus EX. Now, I don't like to include Lucario EX decks and Landorus EX decks as the same fighting deck, because because of how freaking expensive Landorus is, at like 40 to 60 bucks a copy, depending on where you look. And then Lucario decks are more based on Mega Lucario, which, even though you might only play one, Mega Lucario is possibly the first viable Mega we've had, besides maybe Mega Charizard Y. Now, Lucario variants, I think, are going to be a lot more popular, mainly because Lucario's not through the roof in terms of price. But Lucario also has his 2 energy attack, which allows you to draw up to 6 at the end of your turn, which that's pretty solid, and it's kind of almost a beach in terms of draw support. But it's also dealing a fair amount of damage once you add, if you add Machamp in there, you got the fighting energy, you have the stadium, and that all really adds up. And if your opponent happens to have fighting weakness, it's pretty much instant GG. Landorus EX, I don't think we're going to see them as common as Lucario, even though I'd say Landorus is the better card. It's just because Landorus is like getting sold out everywhere, and it's really expensive. Landorus EX, I mean, again, either him or Lucario can be combined with Garbodor to shut down abilities, because neither of them have abilities. But I don't recommend this deck to beginners. It's too expensive, and the next set is based off of Psychics and looks to seem to be a counter to the fighting types. So we'll see like how powerful that is. So some of these people that may have invested in the fighting decks might be regretting it very soon. Next down the list we have, and I guess this isn't really a as meta as the other decks I've discussed so far, but we do have a Flareon variants. I mean, they were popular when Dylan Bryan used it. I believe it was Dylan Bryan. Used it to drive it all the way to championships. But, I mean, Flareon is still in the format, still powerful for being the cheap deck, and it's actually one of the decks I recommend for beginners because of how just cheap it is and how basic it is to play. The main idea is get as many Pokemon in your discard. Flareon hits harder for every Pokemon in your discard, and eventually you're hitting whopping amounts of damage with the Stage 1 Flareon. That's really good. I mean, it can probably still get murdered by Seismitoad, but, I mean, it's still pretty basic in terms of strategy and the amount of money it takes to buy the deck. Next on the list we have Virizion Genesect. Virizion Genesect was huge at Worlds. A lot of people played it, and that caught me by surprise. I thought a lot of people were going to play either some variant of Big Basics or Pyroar or more Excelgor decks. But no, it was actually Team Plasma and Virizion Genesect decks that were the most popular. Virizion Genesect decks use Virizion to power up Genesect. Genesect hits for a huge amount of damage, especially with G-Booster. These decks are relatively expensive. With each of the EXs, you run 3 to 4 usually, being 20 bucks a copy at least. So again, not a deck I recommend for anyone on a low budget, but it is going to probably not change in terms of popularity. So it is I'd say it's a relatively safe investment choosing a Virizion Genesect deck. It will probably take a while to obtain, and with new cards coming out, some cards may not be useful anymore on your current list, but I'd say it's definitely worth looking into if you're going to get into the TCG, no matter your economic status. The last deck I actually have on here is something not released, and that is going to be the Psychic deck. Now, I didn't include Team Plasma on the list because I'm just going to include that in TDK because most variants go under that TDK kind of variant or format of plasmas. Some play Aromatisse, which moves around Fairy Energies, aka Rainbow Energies, but that's pretty much dead now that Prism Energy is getting rotated out. Upon that, I'd think the Phantom Gate in Japan, Phantom Forces in English, is going to bring some of the strongest cards we've ever seen. This would be mainly Aegislash, who doesn't take any damage from Pokemon with special energy attach, and Mega Gengar EX. Now, there was 2 Mega Gengar EX announced to date. One is shiny and one is not. I think the shiny one is actually the worst one, unfortunately. As for Mega Gengar, it can steal your opponents for attacks, and you can use other cards to reduce its own energy cost to get up to the point where you could actually attack with 2 energy with any attack on the board that your opponent has. So if your opponent has Yveltal out and you use Mega Gengar, you can Evo Ball for a ton of damage without having the right energy for if your opponent's already loaded up on energy. So this can be extremely detrimental to anything that has a huge big basic or something on the bench that doesn't have the energy to attack. Mega Gengar just takes that attack and uses it against you. Now, the problem is with Megas is that before this upcoming set, Phantom Forces, is that they weren't really viable because you had to use, you had to lose your turn in order to Mega Evolve. But now with the new Spirit Link card for Gengar, which hopefully it comes to a few other Megas, hopefully not Lucario, but like hopefully Venusaur, Blastoise, they could really use it. It allows you to not lose your turn. It counts as a Pokemon tool. And for those of you that are going to wait a little bit for this new format, I would recommend it because, I mean, just the promise in the cards that they've showed already is already tremendous. I'm not sure how safe of an investment it would be to buy it right off the bat before like seeing how it plays and other people react to like decks like Seismitoad and Pyroar and Virizion Genesect, but I'd say it does show a large amount of promise. I think that's going to wrap it up for this week, where I just covered how to get into the TCG if you weren't aware, and the decks that are really popular right now. If I missed anything, feel free to leave a comment below. I appreciate if you leave a like or a dislike, depending on your opinion on this video. If you want to see more and keep up to date on our videos, you can always subscribe. And I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video if you're still with us. So that's all for this week. We'll have a new video for Monday, and we'll see you guys next time. Adios.